Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar conversation. I'm Jennifer Griffin, Chief National Security Correspondent with Fox News here at the Pentagon, and I'm so grateful to be able to host this conversation, building a community that cares, veterans supporting our service members and each other. And I'm so grateful to be joined by Ken Fisher, the CEO of Fisher House. Fisher House Foundation, of course, has been helping military families stay together during a medical crisis for more than 30 years. And I'm joined by two Medal of Honor recipients, Leroy Petry and James McCloughan. We are so grateful that you could be here to represent the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, which of course is an organization comprised of the nation's Medal of Honor recipients dedicated to promoting the values of the medal. Today, we're going to discuss how veterans can help active duty service members as well as fellow veterans as they all navigate what we're terming veteran for life. As we're seeing from my perspective here at the Pentagon, and I've had a lot of experience over the years up at Walter Reed. I've been covering the US military and the Pentagon for 15 years. And the first thing I noticed when I went up to Walter Reed during the surge was the role that Fisher House played there, and the families that have come through Walter Reed that were able to stay for free at the Fisher House while their loved ones were being treated was truly something that was indispensable. I know that I want to open up the discussion and start with Leroy and Jim and ask you, first of all, what has your life been like since you received the Medal of Honor? And take us through some of the why you stay so involved with the community and how important Fisher House may have been to you in your recovery. Leroy, why don't we start with you? Oops, Leroy, you're muted.
Thank you.
Okay.
I can't thank you enough for doing this. This is amazing. This is a great topic and one that needs to be talked about is what we can do to help each other. I got out of the service in 2014. I was awarded in 2011. And since receiving the medal and getting out of the military, it's been a blessing and a curse all in one. Because like all majority of veterans, I wanted to continue to help others. And that's really what this medal has done is it's just given us a larger platform on what to do, on which to do that by. I never stayed at a Fisher House during my recovery, but I visited a lot of folks inside the Fisher House at San Antonio, Walter Reed, even support the Fisher House a lot up here at JBLM, and anything I could do to help them out, it's important because they do ease that burden of finding out where am I going to stay, how am I going to afford this for a lot of our service members and their families. And it gives them that community while they're staying there of support of other service members, families, or individuals going through similar situations that they can lean on to when they're having a difficult time or just need someone to talk to.
Some of you may not know, but I feel like I should introduce Leroy's background because I sort of backed into the conversation, and then also mention the moment that Jim was given the Medal of Honor. But Leroy was in the Army, and in 2008 in Afghanistan, 75th Ranger Regiment. And on May 26, 2008, on his 7th deployment in Paktia province, he was wounded in both legs by gunfire, kept fighting, threw a grenade that fell between him and his teammates, was wounded, and retired in 2014, but has been so out there. I've seen you over the years, Leroy, and you've been such a model recipient of the Medal of Honor in terms of trying to inspire others. And Jim is a more recent recipient of the Medal of Honor, even though he served in Vietnam. And you were awarded, Jim, in 2017 by then President Trump. You were a private first class, drafted into the Army, grew up in South Haven, Michigan, and in May 1969 found yourself in a very tough firefight. You were a medic. There was one of the helicopters went down. You ended up being the sole medic, and you rescued so many people at great personal risk, taking huge risk out in the field. I mean, one of the scenes that really stuck with me was how you, when you were showing your location, you put yourself in the middle of the field with the red light and guided those rescue planes and airlifts in while under fire, and you wouldn't be evacuated. And that's what makes you both such extraordinary leaders and representatives of the medal. Jim, what's it been like for you since you've received the medal, even though it was only a few years ago, but it was many years after you had served? Tell me how it changed your life.
Well, of course, as Leroy said, we go a lot of places, see a lot of great people, and have the opportunity to work with and for both the military active and those veterans, and of course their families and the Gold Star families too that have given so much. I was amazed. Cherie and I got to visit the Fisher House in Ann Arbor just a couple months ago, and it's just an amazing place. To take all of the burden of what you're going to do, what your clothes are going to get washed, so on and so forth, that's all taken care of. And that's the big thing about the Fisher House is they take care of your problems. Don't worry about that stuff. You just worry about your loved one that's here in the hospital. And I'm just amazed at the various things that I saw. And that's one of the best hotels I've ever seen in my life. It's just beautiful. But of course, I did a lot of things before I got the medal. And so being a medal of honor recipient has changed, not the busyness of my life, because I was very busy as a career person, as a high school teacher and a coach of 3 different sports. So, but I'm a different kind of busy, but I'm really busy. And Leroy is really busy too. And sometimes you wonder, how much do I have to give? And part of that is because there's only about 20 of the 65 that really are able to or want to go out and be visible. But I'm blessed. I'm blessed to be able to do it. And I praise the Lord for it.
And tell me about your family's decision to start Fisher House. How did it come about? When was the first Fisher House built? And what have you seen in terms of the arc of the war's toll, the war ending, and the need that is out there for veterans right now?
Well, first of all, Jennifer, thank you for doing this. And it's so great to see you again. The decision to begin Fisher House back in 1990 was a very simple story. It was the wife of the then Chief of Naval Operations, Pauline Trost, reaching out to Zach, my uncle, and telling him a story about a family that came into Bethesda, dropped all their luggage and ran up to the room and with not even a thought about where they were going to stay or what was going to happen next. And when she made Zach aware of this basic yet underappreciated need, Zach, who was always solution driven, always, wanted to be part of the solution, couldn't serve in World War II due to a construction accident. And so Zach said, you know what, I'm a builder. I have architects at my disposal. This is a problem I can solve. And so it was really that basic. Was one man who was made aware of an issue, who said, I can solve this problem, and did so, and reached into his pocket and essentially built the 4 Fisher houses with money from his own pocket. The first one was at Bethesda. The second one was at Walter Reed. The third one was down at Bamsey, and the fourth one was up in Leroy's territory, where Joint Base Lewis McChord is. So that was the basis for Zach starting the foundation. And what's happened next has just, been not only a blessing to ourselves, but to 430,000 families that have passed through our doors.
And your family really bridged that civil military divide that we hear so much about. And it's those kind of actions that I'd like to hear more about how it impacted your family and how what you've seen over the years in terms of maybe veterans feeling a little distant from the civilians, and what can we do to change that?
Well, you speak of the civilian military divide. I was just up at West Point not too long ago, and I spoke about that. There is a civilian military divide, and while it's been bridged a bit, it will always exist. And I think it's because, you know, at this point, only 1% of our population, we all know, have served. And so there's very, very little commonality of experience when you're talking to people who, you know, may want to get involved with veterans issues, but don't know how. They don't know enough because it's not something that's talked about from a on a day-to-day basis. It's something that we've worked very hard to try and bridge, because Fisher House is a means to an end. It gives those out there a way to get involved. And, you know, it doesn't always have to be with Fisher House, but the most important thing is that people get involved, learn more about these sacrifices and these burdens that are borne on our behalf every day, not only by Leroy and James, but by their families that we sometimes forget about, that are not part of the conversation. So, you know, for me, getting involved in what was a desire to continue a legacy, Zach knew exactly what he was doing when he sent me down to Lackland to open up a Fisher House when he became ill. It became my passion. And now we're on the road to 100, and in 2 years, we're going to hit 100 houses.
Amazing. Leroy, when you came back from Afghanistan, did you suffer from post-traumatic stress? What was your sort of darkest moments, and how is telling your story and being engaged as a veteran helping you cope with any of those manifestations?
Well, I think it helps you and it helps others to share adversity. I was watching a movie last night. I can't remember which one it was, but I do remember it was a show, and it was showing, or it was Yellowstone.
Hmm.
Great show. But if you watch that show, or a lot of shows, it's a lot of adversity, always these challenges and mishaps going on, and that's life. We all face adversity of some sort. And for me, I had multiple. When I was a young soldier, my son broke his tooth, and I couldn't afford to go to emergency dental with 4 kids and $5,800 dentist fee that I couldn't afford. I went to my command and I used the Army Emergency Relief. My wife and I, we had a lot of issues, all my deployments. You kind of build that realm, and then when it all stops and you're home a lot more, the little things start picking at each other, and we had to go to marriage counseling. My first deployment, before I met my wife, I got a Dear Leroy letter, my first letter, my only letter I got in Afghanistan. And I was going to break up with the girl anyways, but it actually serves a good purpose. I put it in our trophy case. So now any young soldier that goes through and sees that and may have relationship problems, they go, oh, well, Leroy's been through it. I could get through it. And then about 3 years ago, I quit drinking because I had a bad problem with it, where I wasn't drinking when I was on the road. It was when I got home, where I would empty the bottle to where I was either throwing up or passing out or both. And what I was doing was I was self-medicating a lot of the issues. I didn't realize I had a great support network out there. And I lacked, my whole life I had physical courage. What I lacked was the emotional courage to reach out and ask for help from any of them. And I realized that you could get through life by yourself. You'll have some challenges, but it's easier if you ask for help. And that's what we are as a military and as veterans. We help each other and we help others. That's what we love doing. Money comes and goes, as you all know, but the difference you make in somebody's life lasts forever. And that impacts them and hopefully causes a chain effect and keeps helping others. But,
Jim, did you find when you came home that you experienced trauma in the early years, later years? Did it manifest itself? And how did service and helping either coach high school kids or working with veterans, how has it helped you?
Well, jumping from a combat life into in a civilian life, I was lucky because coaching was a real good fit for me. You know, there's a lot of ups and downs in coaching, and there's a lot of excitement in coaching. There's a lot of excitement in the middle of firefight with the enemy. But one thing that I did, number one, I wanted that job of coaching. I was taken out of that job when I was drafted in 1968. I already signed a contract to teach, but they said, no, we want to send you to a nice tropical zone, have a little vacation before you go into teaching. And so when I came back, I got very involved, and I didn't talk about my service time for two reasons. Number one, I didn't even want to go there in my mind. I saw some things as a combat medic that the normal person who's a service person doesn't see. I was often the only one to go to the scene of the accident. And so that's number one. And number two, you wouldn't believe me if I told you anyway, so why should I bother you with what I had experienced? So I got deeply involved in my career. A lot of people say over involved, but it was good for me. And then when I retired in 2008, I started teaching in the fall of 1970. When I retired 2008, I started going back to see what I could do with some VA benefits. And my rep said to me, you should get an appointment with Brian across the hall. I said, oh, who's Brian? Well, he's just a really neat guy. He was a VA counselor, actually. And I said, well, why should I want to do that? And she was picking up on some things from me. I no longer was busy with 3 sports and all of the classroom stuff and my family too, of course, raising a family all those years. But I talked with Brian, and Brian was a paraplegic Marine, and he took me through my service time, and actually he's the only one that knew about the battle before I received the Congressional Medal of Honor. He's the only one that got from me, and he was very good at it. And I tell people, if you cut your leg, wouldn't you go to a doctor right away, so you don't bleed to death? Well, if there's something wrong with your mental thinking, something wrong with your emotional stability, why wouldn't you go to somebody who's trained? And the strange thing is, with my situation was, by that time, I had a master's degree in guidance and counseling, but having that master's degree in guidance and counseling did not help me out. I needed Brian. I needed him. I needed his expertise. And then he kind of guided me into how I could, lean on other people and help other people. I told military people, or people who've been in the military, aren't the only ones that face these challenges. And so I say to everyone listening, if you have a situation where your thinking isn't going in the right direction, find someone. Be a best friend and find the best friend, for one thing. You don't have to have a person that has a degree in it, but it helps if they have a special way that they can skillfully guide you through there. So that's when my PTSD, it's not a disease. That's when my PTS started, when I was no longer keeping my mind busy doing other things, and the war started creeping back in.
Mm. Ken, what do you wish people, what do people not understand about Fisher House, and what do you wish they understood? And sometimes it seems like the best kept secret. And what can this community do to spread the word? And what do you wish people knew about what you're doing? Oops, Ken, I think you're muted. Is that possible?
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Yeah.
I'm sorry. In a lot of ways we have been, the best kept secret, but that's because, we have been running very, very lean and very agile, and that has allowed us to do different things. But it's important for us to remember that especially, those that are out there that are still suffering in silence, it's been one of our missions to help educate the public, not only on the burdens that our military go through on a day-to-day basis, and our veterans and what they've been through, but also on the burdens that their families go through. So when, the man or woman wearing a uniform comes home with post-traumatic stress, it's not just that man or woman, the entire family suffers. And I think one of the things that we're most proud of is the fact that we were one of the first going back to 1990 to focus on family issues and to make people aware that these people bear burdens and make sacrifices that the average American will never understand. And, you know, we can talk about the stigma about coming forward with any kind of a mental, psychological challenge. But what James said before is correct. There is no D after post-traumatic stress. Because when you've seen what that 1% has seen, when you've seen what those in the first Gulf War, what those have seen in Vietnam, this is not a disorder. This is, and the quicker that we understand that as a public, the quicker we remove that stigma, I think the better off these men and women and their families will be ultimately.
Leroy, what do you think is there a difference in the veteran community that came from the post 9/11 wars and the Vietnam wars? I'm curious what you and Jim think about that.
Oh, difference in how?
Difference in either way vets are coping right now. I mean, you meet a lot of vets out there from different generations. Are they dealing with the same issues, different issues? What are you noticing, and what do we need to get our arms around?
Well, I think for the most part, a lot of them are the same issues, yeah, because they're life issues. And that's what people need to realize. But I see a lot of our generation and the younger generation not going to the VFWs, not going to the Legions, not going and finding other veterans, not self-identifying in their companies or places when they get out and become a veteran. And so it's hard to find those veterans. Two, not getting involved with those organizations. I look at 10, 15 years from now, and when veterans get together and they say, hey, where do we get together? There's not going to be any place because we didn't support them. And so we got to continue to make sure that these nonprofits and organizations are still there for the next generation. That's our job, is to support them. And like Ken said, his uncle wasn't in the military, but we will always need our patriotic support as much as we need our military. If you look at it, that's where we get all the gaps filled, is that the government can't, or there's too many. And that's why all these organizations came about, to fill those gaps and to support those families. And I really want to thank Ken for that, because I tell folks a lot of times, it's not only us that serve, it's our families. We love our jobs. We think it's great being with the people we're with. More of the sacrifices on the family. They worry about if we're coming home the same, and they deal with us in all our ups and downs, and it's a roller coaster. And people think that because you're out of the hospital, if you're wounded, that you're recovered. Well, not so the case. It's a lifetime of ups and downs for everyone. And we just got to be there to support each other on the downs and push each other up.
Ken and his family were walking point for all the other veteran service organizations that came after. Jim, I'm just curious, from your point of view, what is it that you think you're seeing in terms of either differences in what the Vietnam era vets need versus the post 9/11? I've noticed personally an uptick in the rate of suicides among the post Afghan pullout for the 9/11 generation. It's been a real epidemic, frankly, and crisis. I don't know if it had the same impact on the Vietnam era vets, or if there's something the Vietnam era vets could share in terms of bringing the 9/11 group out of, as we get further and further away from the war, what do they need to be thinking about, and what resources are there for them?
Yeah, first of all, as an observation, there probably weren't as many suicides that we were aware of with the Vietnam veterans, but there were a lot of suicides. I've heard of numbers, but I'm not an expert on that. Also, the biggest thing that I noticed between the Vietnam veterans and those in the war on terror is they kept going back and back and back. And as a psychologist or sociologist, you would say, oh yeah, I even had one guy say he was going back for his fifth deployment. He couldn't wait. he couldn't wait because that was his culture now. His culture was in Afghanistan. So once you're in that and you habitually get involved in that culture, to come back to what you were in before that, and now you're no longer that person who you were before. You're so many years older. Your responsibilities are going to be different. I think, I hope that we can get some guidance with those individuals and say, you know, what did it feel like when you were coming out of high school? You know, you were scared then. You didn't know what you were going to do or whatever. But find a place where you can use your skills. And Ken's a great example here. If you can take the example of Fisher House and say, what is it I can do for other people? We're not put on this earth to serve ourselves. We're put on this good earth to serve other people. So what talents, what kind of loving personality do I have that would help somebody else out? And if we can help that and show them that too, show them that we love them. They're coming out of the military and now, hey, let's be a, and you know, for the Vietnam veteran, 98% of the Vietnam veterans were honorably discharged. I bet you a lot of people don't know that. And they took that same characteristic and that same love that they had for their warriors, and they brought it into their family and their communities and into their churches and into their jobs. And that's really what we need to do when we're transitioning out of any war or out of any traumatic experience and getting back into, I hate to use this word, get back into a normal life. What is a normal life? The life that you're living, you know, that's the normal life. You're in control, and God is in control too.
Ken, is there anything we should know about the mental health services maybe that are attached to the Fisher House for the families when they're waiting, going through these, you know, hundreds of surgeries, and or are there other resources that you would point to that you'd like people to know about that Fisher House is offering?
Well, let me just say real quickly that the warrior ethos is something, you know, that civilians really don't know much about. It's that we'll leave no soldier behind. And when Vietnam veterans came home, they came home to what we remember, which was a terrible, terrible experience. And they used that experience to ensure that no veteran for a future generation would ever go through something like that again. And I think that number one, I think that the veterans community is its own best friend in the way that they can help bring those who are still suffering in silence out and you know, and show them that if you take that first courageous step, that there is help that is available. Fisher House provides lodging and free of charge, as we know, and the other services that we provide. We don't provide counseling. It's not in our lane. It's not what we do. It's our public-private partnership with both the VA and the Department of Defense has allowed Fisher House to build 93 homes on what's now become 2 continents. But Jennifer, we don't provide that kind of service in the house. It's primarily for our families to stay in. But at the end of the day, our sister foundation, the Intrepid Fallen Heroes Fund, built a Center for Excellence down at Bethesda, along with a physical rehab center down in San Antonio. The Center for Excellence has had an excellent track record in terms of treating post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. But it just shows you that there are organizations that are out there that can help and make a difference, because as we pointed out before, there are always going to be unmet needs. But rather than sit back and waste your time on why isn't the government doing this and why isn't, be part of the solution and help. Get your neighbor, if you know a neighbor who's suffering, get them to come forward. You know, remove that stigma in earnest. And let's, by the way, hold our public officials accountable for ensuring that these kind of things happen, not just at election time, but every time. Every day should be Veterans Day, and nobody knows that better than you do.
Leroy, I have a question from the audience here from William Valliere, who says, how can the Gold Star family be assisted with their PTS? Are there resources that you or Jim have, or Ken, that you've come across that could help our Gold Star families?
I think one of the best resources I've seen is Vets for Warriors that General Graham started. He lost one of his kids to suicide and then lost the other son 6 months later in Iraq. And his family has made a commitment to helping others with grief. And they put together this Vets for Warriors at it's actual veterans that you call. And so you already have that instant buy-in and credibility a little bit. And they try to connect you with the best match. So if you call in and say, I was with 2nd Marines, they're like, hey, I was with 2nd Marines too, or I was in 101st.
Wow.
And so
that's a call center, right? It's a hotline or call center?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And what we realized though is that with the Gold Star families is I have a friend of mine who's a Gold Star family member who was talking about that. There's so many resources online. There's over 40,000 organizations. And a lot of them will make the exceptions if it's something that isn't a need for that Gold Star family member, if they can help out. But the best resource you have is the internet or other veterans. Go to your American Legion, go to your VFW, go to the Fisher House. Hey, I need help with this. I know you guys don't do it, but can you help me find it? And the biggest thing we're missing to find those people that aren't calling into a facility or walking in are us going out there and finding them where they're isolated, opening up that communication and having honest dialogue. And that's the one key value that all the branches missed: honesty. Like Jim said, we're quick to raise our hand and say, I can't go on the run tomorrow, I twisted my ankle, but we're not quick to raise our hand and say, I need help financially or with my relationship or with my mental health, because that's our key goal. Is we want to give 100%. And it's okay to walk away and take a step back and say, I'm fixing myself so I can come back and give you 100%. Mm. It's something that needs to be fixed.
You know, there are a lot of resources out there. I host a special once a year at Veterans Day called the Wounded Warrior Experience, and it's going to air on Fox Business News at 4 p.m. Eastern this Saturday. And it's the storytelling of, this year we focused on a panel of veterans who had been severely wounded, but who had found adaptive sports, and they had competed and won gold medals at the Warrior Games and Invictus Games. So sports, I think, is a really important. I think, Jim, you would agree that sports is a great way to deal with some of the invisible wounds and even the physical wounds. The adaptive sports have come a long way. And I know Walter Reed has really been a leader in terms of the prosthetics that are being made now. But talk to me a little bit about the role of exercise in sports, and Jim, in terms of recovery, but also getting veterans out there who may feel like they're slipping right now.
Well, of course, to be physically fit, that's very important. It has a lot to do with how we are healthy, no matter whether it's mental health or physical health. And of course, I've always said that your soul has to be healthy too. I think if we dig deep inside of ourselves, whatever skills we have, whether it's athletics, but I think athletics plays a part of our life, no matter whether you're an athlete or not. You know what I mean? We like to get out there and play certain sports, or just to be involved if it's walking or running or jogging or whatever it is, riding a bike, as my older brother does all the time. But you do have to keep yourself in physical condition and mental condition, and of course emotional condition too. So I think athletics, I could tell when a young man walked into my company whether he was an athlete or not, just the way that he walked. And excuse me, he had a 40%, probably a 40% better chance of surviving because of the character building that athletic life of his led him through his younger years. So I think we face challenges, whether they're mental challenges, intellectual challenges, or physical challenges, better when our health is good, when we feel good about ourselves. So I'm not one to push weightlifting or anything like that, but it's okay. You can just get out there and walk. You can do some stretching. I had somebody tell me the other day, what people don't know what to do every in the morning, they need to get up and stretch. And I've started doing that, and it's absolutely right. I can touch my toes after a few minutes and all those good things. So it isn't something that has to be jumping over a bar at 7'1" or something like that, but do what you can do to keep yourself in good physical health.
It's so interesting that you should say that, Jim, because when I had cancer, I had a very serious cancer, a stage 3 cancer, about a decade ago. And when I was going through chemo, 17 rounds of chemo, I would go and exercise before going in for chemo because I would feel more oxygenated, more strong. And I was getting ready for a mastectomy. And I went to Pilates, 4 times a week. And I was so strong coming out of surgery that I was like in training, and it helped me with, and I think cancer patients and veterans, there's a lot in common in terms of the post-traumatic stress. And I've always advised people that you've got to wake up in the morning, and Pilates for the pain of the aches and pains that veterans feel, the yoga, hot yoga, just to get your body moving and stretching. So important, because strong bodies, strong minds.
Endorphins.
Yeah. Endorphins.
Yeah. Well, not all of us are built to like these football players where they run at about 25 miles an hour and run into each other and that type of thing. We don't really need that as a common person. You found, Jennifer, you found something that really, really made you a strong woman to get through your situation. And you're a great example. I can tell you that.
And what are you seeing in terms of resources out there, and also just changes in the community? Your family has been so involved in the veteran community. What have you seen in terms of either a shift in narrative or approach by from the public, or even the way veterans are speaking about themselves? What concerns you right now?
Oh, plenty. But, one of the things that we just touched on was the adaptive sports and how powerful that is, to restore spirit, rebuild self-esteem. I think that, that shows the veterans out there that might be suffering that what is possible. That's what we hope to accomplish when we got involved with Prince Harry and with the Warrior Games. Especially when we brought them to Orlando. The message I wanted to leave everybody was, look at what's possible. If we could get one person to come forward, then we've accomplished our mission. As far as the narrative today, we kind of pat ourselves on the back a little bit because we say to a man or woman wearing the uniform, thank you for your service. And Vietnam veterans never heard that, and it was a very powerful, group of words. But at the end of the day, thank you for your service is not enough. And so, what we need to do is we need to ensure that these men and women are taken care of, that the narrative has got to be something that transcends just Veterans Day. That, again, we talked before about holding our public officials accountable. We talked about supporting the entire family, the whole soldier, if you will. One veteran suicide is one veteran suicide too many. And, to me, the narrative will not change until we in earnest bridge this gap, this civilian military divide, and people actually understand the sacrifices that are being made on their behalf every single day, whether these men and women are forward deployed, whether they're home, but when they're wearing the uniform, they are making sacrifices and bearing burdens. And, it's important for this country to remember, and not just that, Jennifer, but to remember those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. That Memorial Day is a high holy day of this country and needs to remain that way. It's not a barbecue. It's not a 3-day weekend. It is a day to remember. This country is getting better, but there's still a long way to go.
I think one of the things that strikes me, Ken, is I learned recently that half of all veterans have not even signed up for their VA benefits. That's incredible. And the resources that they're missing out on are huge. And then in the wake of the burn pit legislation that passed, the PACT Act, you have a deadline in the next few months. I think it may even be by the end of the year, that you have to sign up for those VA benefits in order to, let's say you get cancer from having been exposed to a burn pit. If you think you have been exposed to a burn pit from any generation of veteran, you need to have signed up for the VA benefits in order to then have those presumptive conditions covered. And so important to get that message out, I think, to the community. I was very surprised to hear that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But, you know, I think there are some veterans that have become disillusioned with the system, especially you look at the burn pit and the legislation that had been proposed went through the House and the Senate, and all of a sudden things get tacked on to bills. And then all of a sudden these men and women who gave so much to this nation became bargaining chips. It's not about red, blue, or purple, Jennifer. We are all Americans. Whatever your political, whatever your agreements or disagreements are, we're all Americans. And we can't use these men and women as bargaining chips for a bill, because this is what disillusions them. This is what keeps them from coming forward. And I tell you, there's nothing that gets me, you know, going than when I feel as though a veteran is being shortchanged because of that. I didn't wear the uniform, but I can still get mad.
And thank goodness you've been such a strong advocate and voice for these veterans, Ken. Leroy, what impact has the Mission Act had on the veteran community in terms of getting mental health care, private health care if you need it, if the VA can't accommodate you?
You know, I think that's amazing, because sometimes it is easier to talk to somebody that isn't a veteran or wasn't in the military. Because then you feel like you can let your cloak down a little bit more because they don't fully understand you, or whatever the reason may be. It gives another option for immediate care, which is important for those that need it, and not have to wait. One of the things that I was seeing 3 psychologists at one time, because if one wasn't available, I'd go find one that was. And it was like going to the supply sergeant when I was in the military. Hey, I need 10 boxes of chem lights and a roll of 550 cord. Well, here's 1 box of chem lights. We don't have any more, and we don't have any 550 cord. Well, this is mission essential, and this is mission essential to me, just like my care. If you're not going to get it for me, I'll go find it myself. I'll find someone who will. And I think that's really important for our veterans to learn, is that they need to be strong advocates for themselves. We're great advocates for others. Sometimes we're not our own good advocate.
It's a good point. And 2 organizations, if anybody is out there listening and feels like they need a mental health specialist or a hotline to deal with any sort of mental health issues that come from being a veteran or having served, or a child of a veteran, or a Gold Star family, the 2 groups that I have had very good experiences with, the Independence Fund has a veteran suicide prevention hotline, and also the Wounded Warrior Project has great resources. So if anybody out there is in need of any help, there are mental health specialists waiting, and very easy to reach, and they understand what you're going through. We have an interesting point from one of the listeners. Sean Clark says, how about this for veterans and their families? We're starting a reading program called Answering the Call Again to help 2nd to 5th grade students who are slightly or significantly below grade level reading due to the last 3 years of COVID. We'll be using local veterans, their families, and the community to help schools raise the reading scores for these students. But we also think this gives veterans and their families a mission and a purpose everyone can get behind. What do you think about this kind of program, this kind of service? Jim, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's a great program. As a matter of fact, as an ex-teacher, one of the things that was most remarkable about my job, just like the guy that builds a house, he can see how beautiful it is when he gets done. When I saw these kids go in all different directions, in the directions that they should have gone in. And by the way, I always told kids, and I'll tell everyone this, you should be doing the job that you would do even if you didn't get paid for it. And they'd look at me and said, guess what? You're going to be doing something that you like and that you love, and they're going to pay you for it. You're going to be spending the rest of your life, serving other people in whatever way you can do it, fine and dandy. But a reading program to see these kids be enlightened, and know that you're a part of that. That's got to be amazing. It was amazing for me as a teacher too. I had the athletic director and the principal come into my room the day that I was retiring. They said, "Hey, coach, do you know how many lives you've touched?" And I said, whoa, wait a minute. Do you know how many lives have touched me? And I stayed in one place, and they just kept coming. Once you are able to touch one child, two children, a multitude of children, it's going to be amazing for you as well. And that's what we're looking at with that program that you're talking about. It's a way to give and to receive. Two people, dance. There just isn't one dancer. It takes two to make a really nice dance.
I don't mean to interrupt, Jim, but
Please do.
One of the things that every one of our recipients love is our character development program. Mm-hmm. Any chance our recipients or our veterans get an opportunity to go and educate the next generation is an opportunity that can't be missed. I wish Pizza Hut would join them and bring back the Book It program.
Hey, Jennifer?
Yes.
Jennifer, I just was at an event in Akron, Ohio, and Tim Novelli is the head of what's called the Patriot Project, and it's a group of chiropractors. It's a huge group. I mean, there were 20 people there from Texas. Okay, and what they do is they give free chiropractic care to active military veterans and their families. That's one thing in your insurance that's not covered. And so here we have a group of people with a great talent. Many of those people have never been in the military, but they're ready. They're ready to use their skill and to give it to you free. And so that's the Patriot Project. Look it up. I'm sure if there isn't a chiropractor in your area, they'll find one for you.
Leroy, what do you think that veterans could teach active duty service members right now? And is the military utilizing the expertise? I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I know we were all sort of stunned and shocked and are still suffering from the images from the Afghan withdrawal and the way 20 years of wars ended, and to see the Taliban back in power and girls suffering in Afghanistan. But I've also been thinking about the expertise that was honed and sharpened, and how the military evolved, and even the medics, the golden hour that was achieved on the battlefield that saved so many lives of people that wouldn't have survived previous wars, and how that's being applied to help Ukraine, and how it's so clear that other militaries that we thought were comparable, like the Russian military, have none of this expertise, and that we don't have a narrative out there explaining to those veterans that what they learned in those last 20 years needs to be taught to the active duty service members who are still in the fight, and that wasn't a waste. It was not for nothing. The U.S. military honed its talents, its skills, its weapons, and its way of war fighting evolved so much over those 20 years.
Everything changed, even our economy. You look at TSA, traveling now, the security. 9/11 changed everything for us. But I think that experience isn't going away as long as our veterans continue to share their stories. The same thing with recruiting right now. Recruiting's low in all of our branches. And I talk to recruiters all the time because they're being overstressed and long hours trying to fill those needs. And I said, your best recruiters, the reason you don't see Uncle Sam posters saying, I want you, is our best recruiters are our veterans. In our military. The way they are perceived by these young men and women will influence them to sign up and be our next defenders of our country, our freedoms, our rights and our way of life. And America will always ask for those sons and daughters. And it's our job as veterans to prepare them and influence them when we can, when we have their attention. If that's for 5 minutes in the grocery store as we're passing, just to tell them, hey, thank you for doing this and wish you well, then that's great. I realized as a young child that someone sacrificed for me, that I lost my sense of entitlement, that I didn't realize that everything that was around me and the great country that we live in was provided and sacrificed by somebody else. And so I tell a lot of folks, if you want to honor and thank a veteran and their families, be someone worth living for and sacrificing for and worth dying for. And if you could do more to give back.
I think that's the message that we really need to all, whether you're a civilian or a veteran or an active duty service member. The best way to deal with all of the mental health strains that we have experienced as a nation through the pandemic, our young people, it's an epidemic, but the best way to deal with it is give back to others. You start rebuilding communities by giving back. What can you do for other people? I mean, we've got to get back to that and rebuild the fabric of this society. And veterans can lead the way. Absolutely.
Not only that, the 99.5% who are not in the military need to get involved in this too. Jennifer, you, Ken, Leroy, and myself have mentioned that, you know, a person is never dead until their name is no longer spoken. You emphasized, Jennifer, we need to get everybody's story out there. Nobody will understand how valuable it is to be an American until you know those individuals who have given everything that they could give. Some gave their life, but some come back with those scars, those mental scars and things. The family has to face that too. And I often said, you know, we can go back to the war. I knew what was happening to me every day when I was in war, but my parents and everybody back home, they had no idea. And I'm sure they were wondering, gee, I wonder how Jim's getting along today. I wonder what he's facing today. That still goes after that veteran comes home. That's still part of the situation that those families have too. So the stories, sit down with Grandpa, sit down with Uncle Bill, sit down with whoever, have them get into, have somebody be the historian and write it down, because a lot of times veterans will open up to other veterans. But get those stories out there and don't let their sacrifices die. Don't let the American way and American values that these people have fought for in every war, don't let it die.
And Jim, just to pick up on that, I prefer, rather than saying thank you for your service when I see a veteran, I ask people, where did you serve? What unit were you in? And then they start telling you their story. It's a close, it's too, I find it opens up the door to much more fruitful conversation, and it immediately, the person's guard comes down, they start retelling something that was important to them. And so that's my recommendation to Americans. Just ask any veteran you see, where'd you serve? And can I buy you a drink? And tell me about what tell me about your experience.
And that's
stories. Telling stories saves lives. It saves your own life. I know when I was going through cancer, I kept a blog, and that was my lifeline to the world as I was going through treatment. And I got much more out of that. And just you pay it forward by telling those stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ken, we have just a couple minutes left, and if anybody has a last-minute question to throw in the Q&A, please do so. But I want to give you some final thoughts as we wrap up this incredible panel with these incredible heroes.
Well, first, I want to thank Leroy and Jim for their service, for their family's service. And it's just how wonderful it is to get to see you again. Jennifer, I want to thank you for what you do every day. You report on veterans issues, but you're also involved in veterans issues. So I enjoy listening to what you have to say. It helps me a little bit and engages me a little bit more. But I think at the end of the day, I think it's up to us to remember that these are not political issues. This is a bipartisan issue, if ever there was one. And if we can't agree on this, then we really are in trouble. We have some deep divisions in this country, no question. And our public discourse has eroded, and it's difficult for everybody, not just veterans and their families. But you know what? At the end of the day, what we just talked about, what you just said was so compelling. You know, I heard one veteran say, you know what, I don't want to hear thank you for your service anymore. I hear it all the time. What a great way to start a conversation. And by the way, these men and women want to talk about it. They want to tell you when their alive day was. They want to tell you, which by the way was the day that they got wounded. They want to tell you about their experiences. And you know what? Their families want to tell you about what they went through. So let's give them a chance. But let's keep this in the forefront. Let's keep this part of the dialogue. You know, kids will probably not like me very much, but I thought on Veterans Day, what a better opportunity than that, than to teach kids about service and sacrifice and what put this country together. Not just dates of the revolution and so forth, but the sacrifices of men like Jim and Leroy. And you know, and their experiences and their brothers and sisters as well. You know, that's what Fisher House, you know, is about. That's what we seek to do. And we will continue to do it, whether we hit 100 and go beyond, or, you know, whatever. That's what we're about. And I couldn't thank you enough for being a part of this. Again, thank you to my buddies up there, Leroy and Jim, and your families. And God bless America. This is a great country because of you men and women.
And I think that is a wonderful note to end on. Ken, thank you to you and your family for leading the way. Thank you, Leroy. Thank you, Jim, for sharing your story. And this is a great country, and we have a living history with our veterans, and we should all redouble our efforts to reach out and make sure they're not suffering alone, and ask them to tell their stories. Thank you so much for being with us today.